All right. Well, good evening. My name is Heike Demster. I'm the Associate Director of Public Relations and Outreach at YoungArts. My pronouns are she, her. The YoungArts campus is situated on the traditional homeland of Native nations, including the Tequesta, the Calusa, the Taino, and today the Miccosukee and the Seminole. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and future and recognize their continued existence and contributions to our community. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this special info session dedicated to the visual arts discipline at YoungArts. YoungArts identifies exceptional young artists, amplifies their potential, and invests in their lifelong creative freedom. And the YoungArts experience really begins with the competition. So we want to encourage all artists aged 15 to 18 or in grades 10 to 12 to apply. And today we're going to find out a lot more about visual arts. For your housekeeping notes, if you have any questions at any time, use the chat, drop your questions in there. You can also raise your hand. If you want to protect your privacy, since we are recording and sharing this info session, you can change your name to first name only if you'd like right now. Yeah, we want to make sure that people who couldn't make it this evening still have access to this. And also you can rewatch it if you want. So we're sharing the link to that. So again, use the chat. And well, now it's my pleasure to welcome my wonderful colleague, Nidra Ward, Associate Director of Winner Programs at YoungArts. Then we also have visual arts panelist, Leticia Bajuyo, and visual arts winner and US Presidential Scholar in the Arts, Njari Anderson. Quick introduction. A Filipinx-American interdisciplinary artist and object maker based in Oklahoma, Leticia Bajuyo grew up in a small rural town in southern Illinois named Metropolis. She received her BFA from the University of Notre Dame and her MFA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. She's a professor at the School of Visual Arts at the University of Oklahoma and has been working with YoungArts on the visual arts panel since 2019. Njari Anderson is an artist from West Palm Beach, Florida. His work spans sculpture and new media to propose alternative viewpoints to the Black quotidian. Drawing from his lived experiences in both digital and physical spaces, Anderson uses a range of materials to create bricollages of the nuanced, morally complex facets of Black life in relationship to the world around it. He currently lives and works in Providence, Rhode Island, where he attends the Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University. So there you go. I pass it off to Leticia. Thank you.
Greetings. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction and for welcoming all of us here to be with you. And thank you to everyone who's joined and everyone who's going to be watching later the recording, because I just recognize how important and how special YoungArts is. And by taking the time now to hear some additional information, to ask some questions, rather than waiting until October 14th to be able to get to that place, this helps to really think about how you want to apply to be able to be part of this family, to be a part of this situation. And so it's a pleasure to get to be here with you all today. And Njari, would you like to say anything as we get started?
Yeah, I'm just really sort of excited to be a part of this panel. Hopefully provide you guys a lot of information that'll help you throughout this entire process. That's pretty much all I have for the most part.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to push in a little bit, Njari, about as far as what inspired you to apply? Did you hear about YoungArts whenever you were in high school? And what was that process like when you were getting ready for that application?
Yeah, so I went to a school in West Palm, Florida called Dreyfus, and we essentially, the entire crux of our senior year was based around applying to YoungArts. And so it was this big goal at the end of my high school career that I was eventually going to have to work up to. And so I started pretty late in the summer actually working on my application, but worked from the summer up until literally a couple hours before the deadline working on my application. And I'm not sure if this is the time, but I did have a presentation sort of that I could walk you guys through sort of my application to now, if I can present that, Leticia.
Sure, you want to go ahead and do that now?
Yeah. Bear with me one second. So as Heike said, my name is Njari Anderson. I am a 2019 finalist in visual arts and 2019 presidential scholar. So we can, I guess I want to start sort of the crux of this presentation off of on what my portfolio two young arts look like. I ended up submitting 10 images, and I think my portfolio was relatively cohesive throughout, but sort of a lot of this work, I like to sort of structure how I thought about this portfolio, kind of like one work reacting to another, and a lot of it, since a lot of it was being made at the same time, it visually ended up looking really cohesive. And then I think I ended up like really forming my statement around sort of the experiences that I was pulling from the actual making process of the work. So there are 10 works here, and I have a couple of these works scattered out through this presentation, just particularly the ones that were chosen. Some of them were chosen, and a couple of like personal favorites of mine. This was one of, I think this is probably like the second work that I made for my portfolio. But I think a lot of the ideation that went into the actual process of making, because prior to my like submission of Young Arts, a majority of my portfolio was centered around works on fabric or works using textiles. But before this, I was like a mixed media collage artist slash acrylic painter. And so going into my portfolio was a really large step for me to step outside of my comfort zone. And so kind of my mindset when I was applying was that I was just going to try to find, I was going to use this as an opportunity to take a lot of risk and then find something that was really unique to me and unique to the kind of narrative that I was trying to sort of form within my portfolio. The second piece is another fabric piece. This one was one of the pieces that was chosen. It was my first time sewing anything, but a lot of the pieces, they were about like my specific personal narrative was around using my sort of newness to these materials as a way to translate my own like newness to certain feelings or emotions within my everyday life. So I was really thinking about the various layers of approach when I was forming a portfolio in terms of like, how can my personal narrative translate, one, visually through the works themselves, two, materially in my own sort of experience with the materials, and sort of like how my hand was being shown in like the physical application and then the material realization of the actual works themselves. This was another piece sort of along the same vein. It's sort of like a lot of it was me working through and experimenting, and it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't necessarily concerned about the works looking aesthetically sort of pleasing to the eye. A lot of what I was trying to communicate was emotional, and how can that work speak to who I was as a person, because like you're sending these works off to an anonymous panel of judges, and essentially what I was trying to focus on was like, how can I tell these judges who I was without them having any idea of me, or like having any experience of who I was before Young Arts Week, etc. So I was really trying to sort of fill these works with my own personal narrative, and I think a lot of the ideation and a lot of the actual making process sort of helped me speak to that even better when it got time to like write my statement. This was another work that wasn't chosen, but I have a lot of pieces in my portfolio contact sheet that sort of have this sort of like triptych presentation. For me, a lot of the works took on multiple forms, so I did the best that I could to sort of show those multiple forms throughout my documentation as well. This piece functioned as a painting, an installation, and then also fabric sculpture in a lot of senses. So I wanted to make sure that I was also conveying that multiplicity in the actual documentation. So again, it's sort of just like reinforcing, like giving the judges as much as I could with what I had, so that they got sort of a full, like they got the full scope of what I was trying to put forth with my portfolio. This piece is another one that was chosen. This is the exact documentation, and this is just like, I guess this is maybe not what to do. Like this isn't the greatest documentation in the world. I think I shot this off a phone. Do not shoot these off of, like, try to get the best documentation as possible, but I was really trying to show the kind of, again, multiplicities of the piece. This piece became translucent under a certain amount of light, but it didn't really speak to what the piece was overall. But again, sort of the same things throughout my portfolio. It's sort of a lot of works on fabric, a lot of things that are new to me, but a lot of it was really driven by my personal narrative. These are some images during Young Arts Week. There's like a image of this that I'm sure a lot of you have seen on the Young Arts website. Somewhere there's a similar one. This was during one of our sessions with one of the master teachers, and we were working on a collaborative installation that spanned like the entire length of a room. And this is me like hyper focused trying to figure out like how to string all these things together with my friends during Young Arts Week. This was another Young Arts session with Robert Chambers, master teacher who was there. During my time, we were like taking apart a piano, a pinball machine, and a bunch of other things, and we were turning them into various tools for art making, whether it be like sound instruments, pieces, or canvases to paint on, or things, or just anything from this to be turned into sculptural or material objects for making. And so my experience during Young Arts Week was a lot of this. We were like put in these really interesting creative exercises that put you next to some of the more like the most like creative and sort of, I don't know, like in my experience, like they're some of the most creative people that I'd ever been around in my life up until that point. And so being able to work next to them and then also take in all this really like interesting and like information from the visiting artists and the master teachers as well was really impactful. In terms of one shaping my experience there, I don't think I would have taken as much as I did away from there if I didn't have sort of like such a supportive environment from both my my fellow winners and then also the teachers and the visiting artists who were there to really like make this a fulfilling experience. This is me like stepping over like probably 4,000 plus CDs we were working on making sort of small CD collages with one of the visiting artists. This is the actual visual arts show opening night, which is the kind of like each discipline gets their own kind of night to shine. And this is the kind of like grand, not really grand finale, but like your sort of like big opening moment. And this is me, and this is a friend of mine, Devin, who was one of my he was I can't remember what their title was, but he was
discipline coordinator.
Yes, that. But love him, super great guy. And this is sort of like this is a kind of slightly zoomed out view of what my experience was during the opening night. It, for me, at least in my experience, turned into a kind of like full center stage for me to talk to people about my work and really have that sort of beautiful in-person engagement and like share this story that I was putting a lot of effort into, that I was developing throughout the creation of my portfolio and then also translating in the written statements for my application. But it was nice to just like be surrounded by all this beautiful energy and sort of getting to interact with people live. And after this, some time passes, and then I went on to be nominated as a presidential scholar, and then I went on to Washington, had one of my pieces shown at the Kennedy Center. And then fast forward some time after that, I went on to sort of get into RISD and Brown, and now I'm going into my 4th year out of 5 at both schools. And so my work, like the way that Young Arts sort of really engaged my work and my practices that I'm still making, materially, I have completely deviated, and now my work is a lot more research based, and I'm working in sculpture and new media and sound and video. But like, there's still roots, I think, that were planted at my time at Young Arts. There's sort of that exposure to people who I had never interacted, who I probably wouldn't have gotten the chance to interact with in my life if it wasn't because of Young Arts Week and if it wasn't because of Young Arts or Presidential Scholar. A lot of my work now is a byproduct of sort of my relationships with them and the experiences that I took away from Young Arts Week and the Young Arts program itself. So now my work is looking more like this, where it's like 3D rendering for like full-size sculptures, etc. But that started from like even like prior to some of that portfolio work, but like the seed was there, and then it blossomed into sort of where I am right now, which is this current work and this documentary project that I'm working on. So I will stop screen sharing, and I hope that wasn't too rambly. Yeah.
Excellent detail. Thank you, Njari. And I think that helps give people a window into what it's like to be at YoungArts, to be selected to be one of the national recipients, and then how that goes on to influence the rest of your work since then. So thank you so much for sharing that. And a quick share, I just want to include this. I didn't want to interrupt you, but let's see if I can pull it up. The CDs that you were walking on, those were mine.
Right.
So I was that was my first year of working with YoungArts Foundation, was that year that you were a recipient. So I wasn't on your panel yet as far as getting to be one of the selection panelists as far as when it comes to picking, but I was brought in that year as a master teacher. And so the project I brought with me was whenever I make these sculptures, I make so much refuse that I collect too. And so I break thousands of CDs when I do one of these large scale installations, and I collect those, and I sent a box over, and I met the box there, and we made our own artworks using those CDs, which were all sort of collected memory of lots of other people. And so in a way, like I love seeing that, because I didn't realize that we were connected until witnessing. And so I'll stop sharing that, but there was a question in the chat, and I answered it back that when you are submitting, you can't submit more than one image, as Njari showed. And so by being able to have more than one image in a slide, rather than say having a slide of each, like say you broke that up, you would have had like maybe only 3 artworks shown. And so you were able to, like in your application, you get 10 images or 10 slides, but you can very carefully curate a couple of detail shots within that to help us as the panel understand what it is that the artwork that you're creating is like. And so thank you for sharing that, sort of being vulnerable in that way, showing us your high school work and where you are now.
Yeah, and
yeah.
one point to add on, I think it's sort of, if you're thinking about detail, I think it's best to select the parts of the work that enhance it the most, because I think some people think that detail is just an additional add-on, but like sometimes the full image on its own will do most of the weight of the work. A lot of what I was doing additionally was to show additional elements of the work, or to show like that the work exists in multiple different ways.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so helpful. Couple of additional thoughts. And if you're only just now coming to the understanding of YoungArts, I didn't know YoungArts existed until I was invited to be a master teacher. And that was long after I was in high school. And so it's an opportunity to be able to really investigate what all the things that YoungArts can bring, and the length and the stretch of its alumni as far as how many people are part of this group. But at the same time, obviously, there's a lot of artists who didn't necessarily know. And so the fact, again, that you all are taking the time to do this research, to be able to listen to and to investigate how to apply, and what does this even mean? What could it bring to us? And so I think the biggest thing that YoungArts does is it brings connection. And inspiration and influence. And so having this group and having all of the data online, spend the time to go through the website, look through what the application asks for. And as Njari was describing, you can really carefully choose what artworks are in there, because that's what's going to be introducing you. You're, again, also really kind, Njari, to describe maybe not all the images were the best quality that you submitted, but you... But you also, though, as I read your artist statement, they shared your portfolio with me. The artist statement, just know when you apply, the panels are going to be looking at every artwork, all the descriptions. Take the time in the portfolio application to fill out what is in that work, what material it is. Don't just say paint, but what kind of paint, how well was it done? You help us understand. An artwork that we're looking at on the screen all might look 10 inches, but if that was a 10-foot piece, let us make sure that we know what we're looking at. And then also, is there something that you were responding to specifically as far as the description? So take advantage of the description section. have someone else read it, because sometimes you might think a word or a sentence makes sense. So have someone even read that part. But then in the artist statement, as Njari was describing, what influences your work? What is it that is helping us understand who you are as an artist? And so you even might be jumping material. You can help us understand why you change material. And so within the artist statement, describing how maybe working in drawing helps influence the sculptures and how then maybe that informs your painting. So if you are jumping material, help us understand why your portfolio has that kind of breadth in it. But if it can have a single theme, maybe a single material, that can also help introduce you as an artist. What do you think?
Yeah, to add on to that, I think the writing section is specifically from when I went through the process, I think that was really what sort of helped my portfolio the most. I was really like very aware because I came from a really competitive arts school, that I wasn't going to be the best. I wasn't going to be the best painter out of my class. I wasn't going to be the best sculptor out of my class. There were things that I excelled at, and one of those things was I was able to sort of really concisely but accurately convey one, how I was feeling while making the work, what was informing the work, what my mindset was in like going forward and like making that portfolio. And so I mean this is advice for just like even that I take till now. It's sort of like if there are those extra sections where you can add descriptives or they're asking you to write or provide more information about the work, I mean, like I take advantage of that for the most part, because like in the long run, if you do that with intention and you do that with care, it can really only help you. And so like I like in applications that I do now, I'll like write what music I was listening to in the background, because like things like that, they're minor things that contextualize like one, yourself, the work, and what the work is trying to say. And I think as you sort of start to synthesize those things within your application, like looking back at it like as like holistically, I think like those extra descriptors can really only like help to make your work like stand out from others if you're not like materially as strong as like someone else. But like that it could be that extra sentence or that extra word or that sort of extra bit of context that really pushes you or pushes the work forward for the panel of judges that are looking over it.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to panels, something I also like to think about is I think YoungArts does a wonderful job of bringing together a wide range of artists and instructors, teachers, art influencers to be on the panel. And so we're from across the country that are looking at the portfolios, and it goes through multiple levels of investigation, of review. So it's not just one review, but it's multiple reviews. And so it goes through 2 rounds before it reaches the final round, which is myself, Lonnie Johnson, Robert Chambers, all these artists that are looking at it from across the country in New York and in Miami, Joshua Klaus he's sometimes in California, sometimes in New York, but then I know some of the other panelists are across the country and in different media. And so we're not all one material used as far as the way that we ourselves as artists explore. And so as we investigate all of the presenters or the portfolios, we bring to it our understanding of those materials. And so just recognize that it's not just being reviewed once, but it's being reviewed carefully, and it's being seen again and again. And so make sure that you take the time for the whole portfolio.
I do want to jump to the chat. There was a question earlier. Is it recommended to use the same art medium for the entire portfolio?
It depends. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's like drastic from like if it's like you're working primarily like 2D for like 3/4 of it, and then there's like randomly a couple sculptural works, that might be a bit jarring if you can't like tie them together. There was one image in my slide where I was working primarily on fabric for 9 out of the 10 pieces that I submitted, and then there was one piece that was like 6 foot by 5 foot, like huge, right? And it was like acrylic on wood, and that like, but it still narratively made sense into what I was trying to convey to the judges. It's sort of, I think it's sort of like, it can't be like too far, and that's not to limit you, but I think it's sort of like if it like works within the statement that you're trying to put forth, there can be a justification for it. And I've seen that like people have had like works, like maybe wall works that are more 3-dimensional and they're like sculptural and they take on these sculptural forms, but it's like, and it might be somewhat dissimilar from the rest of their portfolio, but like narratively it still works. Narratively it still speaks to them as artists, and it's still like it is still conducive or reflective of the statement that they're putting forth. So I think that is what should inform you. I say, like, don't limit yourself. I was literally painting with like bleach and fabric dye for my portfolio. So like, and I had never touched them prior. So like, if there's a material that is really calling you, I say go with your gut and like follow that, but also don't like feel like you're super restricted because there's these set parameters that you have to sort of put your work into.
Mhm. And since we do have, as I was mentioning, since we do have such a broad level of skill set as far as types of materials, performance approaches to sculpture, ranging from object making to, as you worked with Robert, you were sharing that one image where you all made the machine piano destruction pieces, right? And so the range of work that we're looking at is a broad one, but it depends on what is your voice right now. So that's what we're trying to understand, is what's your voice. And so what type of visual work are you doing? But taking the time to curate to help us see that. And so if the work is best shown, that you, as you go through your whole portfolio, if your work is best shown by unifying it through one medium to be able to help us understand your story, you unify it. It's not going to be weakened by it. You're helping us understand your story. If your work is best explained by maybe having a split, like you recognize, like maybe there's a shared evolution between the way you maybe work with ceramics and the way that you work with, say, charcoal, as far as like the way that there's a permanence and maybe an impermanence, help us understand that. But that's also where that statement writing comes in. Don't just assume that we can read your minds, but it depends on your work as far as what would be the best thing to curate. But use all 10 images. The one thing that I think sometimes can be difficult is if you have like only 5 pieces and you think that we don't recognize that you just duplicated the same image. And so use all 10 images to your best ability.
Just to tack onto that, we actually changed the requirements recently based on Ms. Johnson's advice that it has to be at least 8 pieces. So if you have to submit 10 images, no matter what,
Right.
It is required, but it has to be at least 8 pieces. And if you only have 8, then the other 2 need to be details of the work, but at least 8 pieces. And then I'm going to jump back to the chat. And this one is for me. How many entries do you receive typically for visual arts? So when it goes to the first initial round, there's usually, it depends, but usually around somewhere 1,500. It is quite a lot. Visual arts is one of the highest disciplines that we have entries for. And then when it gets to the panel, there's usually about 100 and something that get to them. And then winners are selected at that round. Not everyone who gets to that round is selected as a winner, but that is where the winners are determined. And there is a cap for the amount of finalists, but honorable mentions and merits are unlimited. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of how that whole process works, from going from 1,500 to the different levels and smaller amounts. How can someone make a portfolio more cohesive?
Make more art.
Yeah, I think it's that.
But it's hard if you only have 8 pieces. That's make it as strong as possible. But if the more art that you have to select from, then you can help make sure that it's the most cohesive portfolio that you can submit. And so if you have 20 artworks, if you have 40 artworks, and you're picking the 8 to 10 that tell your story the best, is a one way to be able to, I find, to create a more cohesive portfolio. And the other way is to start, if you have a theme that you're working with, maybe your faculty are working, like giving you a prompt, rather than just answer the question that they've given you, like, don't necessarily be formulaic, but what is it that's driving your curiosity that you want to create and bring into this world, and help us see that by picking that series.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's definitely just make more work. I mean, that's like advice that I get even now. I'm like finished like my 3rd year in arts college or university, and it's still just like, my thing is that I still need to make more work. And I think a lot of it, I think something to keep in mind as you're making these works is that, like, these things don't have to be perfect, right, for them to be presentable to the panel of judges that are looking at your work. There are a couple of works in my portfolio. I made one on like the bus ride to school that morning, and then documented it that day, that like same day, and that was like a 30-minute piece, right? And that's not to say that like work that takes longer isn't as valuable. Work that takes less time doesn't. Like, I'm not equating each other, but I'm just saying that I think if you get bogged down in the kind of like everything has to be perfect, you end up actually limiting yourself more when you could make a larger breadth of work and then pull from that and then work around, like, then figure out what like these works are speaking about, or like how they're speaking to you, and then you can form your portfolio around that. Like, it really just, I think whatever method of working feels most natural to you. I know, like, I know some of my friends like work on 5 pieces at a time. Some people work on one thing before they move on to the next. Personally, I was doing a bit of both. I was like working on some things, like 3 pieces at once, and then like when I was finished with those 3, I'd go and like spend a bunch of time on that. I think it's really just about like finding your method of working and then using that and translating that into how you make your pieces. And whether you end up with 20 pieces and you're picking 10 or 8 from that to form your portfolio, I think, again, going with your gut about like which ones are speaking to you the most will more often than not lead to the result that you're hoping for.
It could also be the ones that you're the most proud of, which, you know, that you're excited that you created or that you really want us to see. And so there's a couple of different ways that you could go through that selection process. And sometimes it's good to also like bring it to your top 20 and then show someone else. Maybe have them help you select and then show somebody else the same 20. And so, you know, sometimes it's hard to be able to be objective about your own work because they might all be your favorites. How do you pick your favorite child? And so you've made all of them. And so sometimes you might have to lean on someone else who's maybe more objective to help you curate that selection. And I'm sure you have a lot of people in your lives. I see some other messages coming up in the chat. Nidra, could you help with the YoungArts as far as like the like who can apply? And
yeah, I'm gonna go back to where we left off. The next question is digital art accepted?
It is, and you just have to make sure that you think about, like, if you haven't yet, look through the groupings of visual. So there's design, and then there's visual art, and then there's photo. And so some people apply to more than one because you recognize you're making in lots of different areas, but you might have a little bit different portfolio, and you also might write about your work a little differently. And so what I am looking at in the panel that I'm a part of, we're looking at things that we would consider visual art as far as sculpture, painting, drawing, which does include digital painting and digital sculpture. And so, like, Njari, you were sharing the 3D rendering. And so that would be included as well. So yes, digital art counts, but think about like what the goal of the type of digital art it is and what its mission is. And so it might fall underneath one of the other categories, depending on exactly the way it addresses its medium.
Next question, do we have to have a single theme?
We've kind of talked about that a little bit, but as far as cohesion, so cohesion can be thematic as far as topic, but it can also be maybe targeted more, less of a theme and more of an area, depending on how it is that you see yourself working right now. And so it doesn't have to have one single theme or thesis, but at the same time, that can be one of your cohesive unifying factors that helps to tell your story, is it might be something that's personal, or maybe it might be a response to the current state of events. So there could be a theme, but it's not required to be a theme.
And next, does art reflecting the political state of the world generally get more recognition?
That's a good question. That's tough because I think as artists, we are in this world, and I think sometimes we might be making artwork that's reflective of our position, even when we don't realize it, because we have this lens that we're looking at the world through. And so we're not looking through and like, oh, this is a better, like this is a check mark because of the politics. But you're sharing your lens. What is that, your view? What is coming into your heart right now? And what is it that you are creating? And so for some people, something I tell my students is when a response to politics doesn't always look the same. Maybe I want to make work that is this landscape behind me is a wallpaper. This is actually a wallpaper mural that came with the house that we bought, but I look at a completely different view. And so maybe a theme might not always look the same to someone. And so this, for me, it has an idyllic view, but it's also ignoring so much about what else is going on in the world. But it doesn't mean that the artist was ignoring it. They actually might be making a very specific choice about something that they recognize they long for, something that they want, and they might feel guilty about wanting that. And so there's a way that you might really spend some time to think about what is driving your work. And so that doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I hit this checkbox because I want to make political art, that because I think the panel is going to respond to it better. What is it that you are making right now? That's the story we want. And so it's not like it's reviewed better or worse, or that it's higher or lower based on like that. But as far as if it is, I don't know if that's making sense, but that what is it that you are wanting to communicate about your position where you are today? What is it that is coming out of the work that you create when you sit down or when you stand up, depending on how you make?
And the next one is animated work would not be submittable for visual arts. Is that correct? So that's kind of depends. We do have animation under film. If you are making an animated film, then you would apply under film, but we have had animated works in visual arts. It is obviously images, it is stills, but we have had in the past animated works, stills of animated works in visual arts. So the answer is it depends. And then the next one is YoungArts only open to students that are US citizens, or can international students apply? So it is, you must be a US citizen, a US permanent resident, or eligible to receive taxable income in the US. And that basically means that you have a social security number. So any one of those three, you can apply to YoungArts. Is the full portfolio due with the deadline, with the application deadline? Yes. So your portfolio is part of your application. So the full complete application is due by October 14th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, and that's 8:59 p.m. Pacific. But yes, the entire application, including the portfolio, is all due at the same time. Playing off the question that was just asked, might YoungArts shy away from choosing artwork for political, religious that might potentially be seen as controversial?
Before I jump in, either of you want to answer or respond?
I mean, I just know in the original, I mean, in the first couple rounds that no, there's no there's no shying away, just specifically because it's political or religious beliefs. But I'll let you speak to the panel round.
I was going to speak from like winner finalist perspective. I think I think it's primarily like what is, I don't think there's like hierarchies as to necessarily what's privileged in a work. I don't think, like, again, with what Leticia was saying about checkboxes, I don't think you should, like, I don't think hitting checkboxes will get you like like finalist or merit or honors. But what I think is really important, because like during my time at YoungArts, I saw a breadth of work. There was some work that was really political. There was some work that was personal with hints of like politics. There was some work that was apolitical entirely and strictly material. And so there was a breadth of works, but the one key thing about those works from my friends that I was seeing while I was there was that work was reflective of that person in some format or in some way, and whether that be tied to their like upbringing or political affiliation or religious background or just their like material obsession. I think what was really important, because like we were all producing really different work and we were all coming from really different subjectivities, and so you have all these layers of nuance that the judges have to like filter through, and that we also have to like make work in response to as each individual artist. So and I hope that makes a little bit of sense. It's sort of like, I think those like check boxes, whether it be political, religious, etc., I don't think that necessarily factors. I think it's sort of, is this work like strong on your terms and like strong because it's of this reason? Is it reflective of why you're making it? Is it reflective of who you are as an artist? Whether your positionality as an artist is controversial or not, I think it's just like, does the work, if you weren't in the room, could you leave the work in a room, and then could someone walk up and get a picture of who you are from that work, or what you want your work to speak about? So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
So absolutely. And so don't shy away from choosing because you think it's going to be reviewed better or worse, trying to measure up to what you're imagining we're going to be reviewing for, or what our hierarchy is. And so I think the way that that Nidra and Njari have described is absolutely correct. And so we're not shying away from the topic. We're going to address the work that you bring to the table and read through the statement, look through the way that you've presented the artwork. And so put your work forward rather than trying to fit into what you think we might be assuming. But like Njari said, there's work that's highly technical, representational, next to work that is extremely experimental and breaks it down in the end because it's entirely ephemeral, and everything in between. And so I'm going to share my screen real quick just to, as we can continue going through those topics, but I wanted to share, if you haven't yet, I'm a big fan of like looking at who else has won to understand maybe the breadth of the ways that people work. And so if you haven't done this yet, please do so. If you have already, you're just getting a little review. But these are the YoungArts recipients for national from last year. So we only met them online through Zoom, as far as the whole week that we had with them. And I got to see 2 of the winners in person. I had an event in Houston for a show that I was a part of, and I got 5 tickets to invite other people. And I invited 2 winners that were from Houston to come and be my plus ones, well, +1 and +2. And so they get to meet all these other artists and curators. And so you never know who you're going to get to continue to connect with. But what you're seeing here are all the visuals. So you're seeing the photography section and the design section and the visual arts section. And so like Sophia Bassett, mostly sculpture, but also performance and installation. I remember getting to learn about Sophia's work. Caroline Berthen, most sort of like collage painting, different vantage points. Isabel Cookson, and so is working with, in this case, it's photography, but it's cyanotype photography. And so rather than applying, rather than being seen within photography, we're seen as more within visual art. So it's like, again, thinking through how am I using this medium? And so although cyanotype falls within photography, the way that Isabel's using material, it's more in the realm as far as seeing it as a type of collage. Jack Dunlap, that was one of the artists that joined me as part of my guests. And so Jack is working with sculpture and is working in response to the community that he lived in Houston. Did we know that this is in Houston at the time? No, all the applications are anonymous. And so we don't know your name. We don't know what school you're in. We don't know if it's a tiny school like the one that I went to when I was in high school, or if it's a large art school. We don't know. Unless you write it into your statement, we aren't aware. And so depending on what your story is, help us understand, help us have that window in. But again, you're seeing the range. So Thomas Hicks was one of the visual artists last year. And so taking photography, found photography combined with collage and sewing into the photographs. Sarah, these are paintings, and sometimes the paintings have thread in them. These are more in the design. This was in the design realm. So I hope this helps a little bit to see a little bit of the range of work. I encourage you, look them up, Google search them. Their names are here. See what work they do now. See where they're at. Same with the alumni. See what the range and the stretch that you would be a part of by being a YoungArts recipient. Kaiser's work. And a lot of these YoungArts recipients we are continuing the panel. We make Instagram groups and we continue to stay in touch. They've invited us, the panelists and the master teachers, to their exhibitions and to their shows long after they're done with Young Arts. And so getting to be a part of that community is really powerful. And so when you're applying for more than just a scholarship. You're applying for influence and connection and a network that I think is one that continues to grow with you. And as Njari, as you just shared, friends that you've made. I think of it the one time that I got to be at the Nationals before we went on COVID version, it was like art prom, like the formal event. It's like, think of like all of these artists, and it's not just visual art. You're being influenced by students that make film and that are dancers, like across all the media, and they continue to stay involved in influencing each other's work long after they're at Young Arts. Back to the questions.
Yeah, so is there a recording available or a next info session? So this is the only one for visual arts, but yes, there will be, this is being recorded and it will be up on our YouTube channel within a few days, a week. It'll be posted to the channel. Is there an ideal grade in which to submit? No, it's based on you and what you feel your work is ready to be submitted. You know, if you're in 10th grade and that's when you feel you want to present this work to the panel of judges, then absolutely, that's completely up to you. But no, like Leticia said, there's no, the judges have no idea what grade you're in. And she did mention, unless you put it in your artist statement, do not put it in your artist statement.
I just know that sometimes it might be influential work, right? So if you're like, I describe myself as being Filipinx artist, and the fact that I grew up in the Midwest heavily influences my work. And so I can't write a statement without saying that, but I can leave out like specific details.
Yeah.
I can like sort of like hint or reference without saying all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to add to it as well, Nija. So when you apply, if you make it to a certain round, what level is it that you get feedback? Because if you apply, because I know we've seen a couple of applications more than once, if you apply and you're still eligible, so you're not 18 yet, say you apply and you're 16, and you make it to a certain level, you get feedback and you can apply again.
Yes, so if you get to the panel level, to that final round, and you are not awarded, but you are eligible to reapply, you will receive feedback directly from the panel. So yes, feedback, super important. And Heike just put.
Oh, and we remember too. We're like, as like, you know, as far as like, you know, like, oh, they obviously listened, they heard, and then you can see it get stronger.
Yeah, yeah. And Heike just dropped some past winners in visual arts into the chat. So yeah, look those up, take a look at those. When will the winners be announced? So the winners are announced early December.
Oh, I love the stories about when people get the call. Njari, what do you remember? What it's like?
Yeah, I was in my senior painting class in high school, and it was like an hour before our final bell, and I remember just like randomly getting a call, and then I got off the phone, like and my mouth was like wide open, and then I think I like ran like the full length of my visual arts building, and then I ran down the hall to another friend of mine who was a design finalist that year. I told her that I had won, ran back to my classroom, and then she ran to me in like 5 minutes because she had just gotten the call, and then we were just like stuck there, like pretty much frozen. But yeah, I don't know, it was just like yeah, it was the most, it was like a really life-changing moment, I think, for me. And yeah, it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to jump on that also, finalists are receiving notifications by phone and by email, and honorable mentions and merits received by email only. And that is because Young Arts Week is literally a month after that, so we have to get them confirmed fairly quickly. So that's the reason why we do try and call finalists also. And how many finalists are selected for visual arts? So there is a cap of 24. They've usually had around 20. I think there was 15 one year. and
We are
virtually
selective.
it's different too. But yes, there's usually a cap of 24, 25. But some years it's 20, some years it's a little less than that.
Oh, our panel, I love being part of this panel. It's like the best present I could ever asked for that I didn't even know existed. And that, you know, we will challenge each other, but we will also only let in national winners who we feel are national winners. And so if there are only 17 portfolios that we feel are at that level, we will only let in 17, even if the cap is 24. Now, at the same time, if it goes all the way up, we will fight for you. And so if we're like, there's 25, we'll find a way, right? But we're really we're taking our time, we're going through like, what does this mean for this year, for this selection that we're looking at? And again, as Nidra mentioned, you're looking at, it starts with 1,500 applications. There's people from all over the country. And I remember this one way that I like to think about, like, what does it mean to make it to the level of having the dialogue? There was a film recipient who was 16 a couple of years ago. And every night during Nationals Week, each evening there's performances. For visual arts, it's the exhibition, and you get to talk about your work. But there's these dance performances and music performances. And I remember a film student was watching, and she was just blown away by watching all of these other performances. And then it dawned on her, she was like, wait a minute, I'm here. They are the best of the best within their realm of 16 to 18-year-olds across the country, dancing or singing to like this level that's phenomenal. She's like, wait a minute, that means I'm here. And she started crying, just recognize like that's what this panel thought of my work. And so Njari, that's where you were whenever we were choosing. But that's one of the things, like when you go through and review all of these other ones, just recognize like they went through a lot of selection, but that doesn't mean that your work doesn't deserve to have that same view. So you take the time. So this is not the portfolio you wait until October 13th to do. This is a portfolio that you put in the effort. You want us to look at it and read it and to help understand you should be at that top, however many. Help us get to that place. Help us see you.
We have about 8 minutes left. If anyone has any other questions, please let us know. And in the meantime, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what it means to be a Young Arts winner past your winning year. And Njari can help me speak to this as well, but there are so many more opportunities past your winning year for all levels of winners. You know, in addition to a monetary award, and monetary means it's cash in your pocket, it does not have to go to school, it's not a scholarship. In addition to that, for all levels of winners, you receive a vast amount of networking. There is a platform called Young Arts Posts, and that is for all levels of winners. And it's basically a Facebook. It's kind of like Facebook, and it's exclusive to Young Arts winners. So you get to meet fellow winners, you can collaborate, you can network, you can look for opportunities, other opportunities like scholarships and grants. We give out micro grants every month. So there's so many more opportunities to you through Young Arts, even past your winning year. And Njari, do you want to speak a little about that?
Yeah, so I could speak to a lot of things actually. One, to Young Arts Post, which I have kind of been pretty like adamant about making sure that I like check like every couple of weeks or so since I got into, since I've been at RISD and Brown. This past year I was a recipient, or this past like May or March, one of these previous months, I was a recipient of one of these micro grants, and the 3D rendering that I showed in my presentation at the beginning is actually the piece that micro grant went towards. And this fall, I'm going to be realizing that, and it's going to be showing at a museum at some point during this fall. So like actual monetary sort of like help bring a piece to life. Last fall, I was sort of like a curatorial intern or mentee for the Miami Film Festival, because I'm also studying film. So I was a part of the panel that helped to pick some of the films that went to the Miami Film Festival that for the 2022 Miami Film Festival. And one of the films that I was reviewing actually got chosen. That's another great thing. in terms of other opportunities, there's a lot actually. It's constantly being updated, and it's from all disciplines, and not necessarily like, and it's pretty widespread in terms of like where they try to source opportunities. I know there was an opportunity in Hawaii last year that I was really interested in, but I couldn't go because I'm in school. But there are all those sort of things like that for sort of each discipline. And then also there's previous Young Arts winners who also post their own events and opportunities that people are like more than welcome to apply to. Like when I have my senior show, or when I have my like undergrad show, I'll probably put it there so I can like invite my friends to come. And then also post Young Arts, I guess more specifically within the scope of like finalist to presidential scholar. That is another opportunity as well. It's sort of like after finalists and after Young Arts Week and after like you meet with the master teachers, there's a selection of presidential scholars that gets announced, and then you get to go to Washington, and like you get to go to the White House and you get a medal and you stand and you take a picture with the president, and you get your work shown in the Kennedy Center, and you get to go to this really amazing performance by some of the vocal and the music winners and the dance winners, and it's a really humbling experience. At least personally, I could speak from it. But I think sort of a lot of the connections, and I think also the most important thing that Young Arts has provided me is sort of like, it's like network of connections. It's like I'm still really good friends with Heike. I had a show in New York last year that Heike came, and like as I was like setting up in the gallery, it was a mess. I was able to like go around gallery hopping in New York with Heike. So there's all these really amazing things that happen, and I'm still really good friends with a lot of people from my cohort, both in visual arts and then just overall, and then other friends that I've met from other years who've reached out to me, just because that's just how the network is. But yeah, it's really, really valuable personally, and then just also for my friends as well.
Plus you get invited to come back and do things like this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to jump back to the chat because we have a few more questions and only a couple minutes left. So where do you recommend getting feedback for your portfolio? You've kind of mentioned this a little bit, you know, teachers, parents, friends, but if you want to speak a little more to that.
Certainly. And so it depends on what your situation is. You might have a lot of people around you that can help, but maybe you don't. If you don't, if you've ever reached out to any like galleries, museum curators, but also art faculty at other institutions. And so if you're nearby a college or community college, ask those faculty if they would be so kind to take a look at your portfolio. You could claim it within a consideration that you're thinking about going to school there, you know, and you're looking for more information about like what they have to offer, but you could utilize like your community in a broad way. But if you don't ask somebody who's just going to pat you on the back. That feels great for like about 5 seconds, but that's not going to help you prep for being able to put this portfolio together. And then you could also reach out to other people that are past winners. And so if there's anybody that you look through the list, is there somebody that's from maybe your same state, maybe even your same school? Ask them if they'd be so kind to look through. Don't send them the 100 images, at least send them a draft, like after it's already like farther along. Don't make them do the work. You're looking for feedback. And so think about those parts.
So I'm just going to answer 2 questions that are very similar in the chat, and that is the Presidential Scholars in the Arts. So Young Arts is the sole nominating agency for Presidential Scholars in the Arts. So you would have to become a finalist in Young Arts in order to be nominated. The Presidential Scholars has their own set of requirements that our panelists have to follow. And that is, you must be a graduating senior in that year, senior in high school, and you must have a GPA, a cumulative GPA of 3.25 or higher. And that is their requirements. There is nothing that Young Arts can do about that. You have to meet those requirements. So yes, it is high school seniors only. However, if you do become a finalist prior to your senior year, you are invited to apply. Once you become a senior, you are invited to apply to be a presidential scholar in the arts if you did participate in National Young Arts Week, because that's when the nominations happen. So I hope I clarified that and answered those questions. We are at time. So if there are any other questions that come up, please feel free to write to apply@youngarts.org. And that is where you can get all of your application questions answered. We also have a new feature on our website called Ask an Artist. And that is where you can get connected to past winners, and, you know, talk about what it's like to have a life in the arts, get their experience just as you've gotten from Njari tonight. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you all so much. And again, taking the time to even be here tonight already says so much about the way that you view the importance of your work and what you see your next steps as being. So thank you and congratulations on being here and being a part of this conversation.
Best of luck to all of you guys.